So here's the deal. Good news is I have a job now. Not so good news is that this also means that I can't spend 30 hours a week trying to edit videos now. Not that I've ever been very successful at that before. Anyway, if I wanna keep up my stream of content regardless of that, it means I will have to get a little bit creative. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go through my Tumblr inbox where people always ask me like the most interesting kinds of meta questions about my fandoms. Mostly Persona actually. I know you're all here because of Persona. Don't worry, there will be lots of Persona. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer them here instead of answering them on my blog, because this is a video and my blog is nothing but me text, and then I don't find them anymore, and then I'm always like, wait, I did that long essay on the integrate complexities of the Linkin Park CDs in Yosuke Hanamura's room. Where did I put this? It's such a loss to humanity that I can't find that anymore. Anyway, trying something new here. So, just putting on some music for myself. Not the same music you guys are going to hear, because I would get copyright claimed to hell and back if I played that on the video. Anyway, without any further ado, let us begin. Fenrir Lives asked me sometime ages ago. I'm not good at keeping up with these. So what exactly is the difference between a palace and a shadow? Besides deific origin, of course. It may just be themes overlapping, but given how Palace 4, which one was this? Let me count through. We had Kamoshida, Madarame, Moneybags, what was his name? I forget. Futaba, of course! Of course they're talking about Futaba. Who else would they be talking about? Anyway, back to the question. Given how Palace 4 is themed, I wouldn't be surprised if they could shift in nature from outside influences. Actually, based on your video about it, one of my faves by the way, thank you. I was wondering if the collective unconscious acts like a kind of pH solution, changing in nature as divine demonic entities or powerful humans interfere. I'm not actually sure what you mean by pH solution, but I think I can reply to that question regardless. What you need to keep in mind here is that actually the difference between the palaces and the worlds that appeared in the TV world, I don't really want to call them shadow worlds, because aside from that one song, which I don't actually even like, on focus. Besides that song, there isn't ever any mention of that term in the games, and there's no need for that, because Teddy spells out pretty directly what the worlds that appear within the TV world are. He calls them the reality of the people who are there. They are a reflection of the personal reality of the people going there, the reality as people who come there perceive their own reality around them. Which is pretty similar to how the palaces are described by Morgana as being reflections of the distorted perception that people have of their surroundings. So as you can see, the two are already very similar in concept. And to go a little further with this, I first have to make sure that you guys are all familiar with the so-called allegory of the cave. This is an allegory that the Greek philosopher Plato brought up. Basically it goes like this. Imagine there's a tribe of people living in a cave, and these people are bound up by their arms and legs, and in a way that they can only ever look at the walls in front of them. They can never look behind themselves, and behind themselves is a fire that illuminates the cave. So all these people ever see is, imagine there's objects, and an object passes by the fire, and all they ever see is the shadow that said object casts, which you can't see here because the light is behind me. This is not going to work. Anyway, all these people ever see are the shadows of the things that pass by the fireplace. This is all they know. This is their whole reality. Now imagine a person from the outside world comes to this cave and tries to tell the people there about the outside world, about how it is to not always look at shadows and what colors are, what it means to see something that is not that raw. those people would probably not listen to this person. They would laugh at him and try to cast him out. Because they just can't comprehend anything that is outside the world that they've lived in all their lives. Basically what it's about is that every person has their very own, very specific reality that is not objective, but based on our senses, colored by our beliefs, our emotions, our memories. Basically no two people ever have the same experience or ever perceive the same moment the same way. I mean, we can't even empirically prove if the color red looks the same to any two people. We can't claim that our reality is a complete reproduction of what like an objective reality would be like. And this is basically what these two concepts are about. When somebody enters the TV world, their thoughts materialize there, and either they materialize into their shadow or they materialize into an image of what is in their head, how they perceive the world around them, which creates these worlds. And the palaces work very similar to that, though because it's not about a person actually entering the palaces themselves, it's more like their perception filtered through their shadow, and through the aspect of their shadow that becomes the treasure is reflected and basically cast onto walls of mementos. Like going back to that allegory, you have to imagine that mementos is like that cave and the treasure is like that fire. And what we are seeing are the shadows that are cast onto that wall for those people, how those people see the reality around them. So both the dungeons in the TV world and the palaces are manifestations of someone's personal reality. Good, that explains how they are similar. I didn't really explain now how they are different though. The difference here is that when you go into the TV world, you can be any average Joe Schmo, and if you're just there long enough and feel even the slightest bit of anxiety and are not a Persona user, eventually a dungeon will form. The palaces are different from that because the palaces form specifically because somebody has broken free from the restrictive social order of specifically Japan, like the one that was mandated upon them by the Holy Grail, aka Yaldabaoth, and they have found refuge within their own delusions. So the palaces are like a notch higher. It's always about a delusion, a distortion that colors how these people experience their reality. Like, as I said, the treasure is the fire, but it's like a flickering fire. It's not a clear fire. The light here's the shapes that the people see long, and so basically any person who has a palace in Persona 5 would probably form a very similar dungeon if they were to enter the TV world. But not everybody who has a dungeon in Persona 4 would also get a palace. It depends on how bad their distortion, their subjective reality varies from the reality that everybody else is feeling. As to why they act so differently, this got to do with the different functions that these different parts of the worlds of the collective unconscious that these mini-worlds manifested in has to do with. Like, the TV world is specifically meant to be like the cultural unconscious of the Inaba area. It's supposed to be an aggregation of the average feelings that the people in the Inaba area are feeling. So when somebody from that area enters that place, of course the place would react violently to their personal perception of reality. Mementos is a bit different from that, because Mementos specifically acts as the dungeon that has formed around Yaldabaoth, with Yaldabaoth being the will, a collective wish for an order, an unshakable order that has manifested within the society of Tokyo. He's in complete control of that realm, so anything that manifests there has to do with his rule, and the palaces are basically manifestations of people who break away from that rule. In both cases, the dungeons manifest due to deviations from what is normal for that world. But in the TV world, it's just because something physical has entered it that this deviation occurs. In Mementos, this deviation that causes a part of it to split off into a palace happens because somebody from within Tokyo has broken away from Yaldabaoth's order. Continuing right on from that, here we have Chin and Takaya asking, "Your Adachi Palace analysis has me wondering." Yeah, I wrote a piece about Adachi's dungeon in Persona 4, basically acting as a palace. Do you think Takaya would also have a palace? Yes! Despite having a persona already, also yes. Since it was artificially forced on him, yes. I don't think Chin or Chidori would be distorted enough to have full palaces, since they are just following him, but that's just me. I would actually dispute that last point too. Takaya's reality is very distorted. So even if his shadow acts as his persona, I still think a palace would have formed if it happened around that time and in the Tokyo area. I still think, like the times that his shadow was not under his control, like when his mats wore off, that shadow would have showed up in a palace, and that palace would have existed regardless. Like there would always have been like a little piece of the shadow behind in that palace. It's clear that he is not seeing reality as the average person is seeing it. So it's pretty clear to me that to him, this distortion would have led to a palace being created. And as for Jin and Chidori, they also have a distorted image of the world and a distorted self-image as well. Like, look at Chidori, she's self-harming, and she doesn't even realize that she has depression. She sees it as a normal state. That is pretty distorted. Like, it's clear from how Chidori talks that she's suffering from depression and that her self-harming is the usual kind of self-harming that you see sadly manifested in people like that, but she doesn't perceive it like that because her reality is just so different, and she needs to be in long contact with Junpei, who has a more normal reality, a more average reality, to come to the conclusion that she has this distortion within her and to resolve it. And Jin never really resolves his distortion because it eventually drives him to get himself blown up for Takaya, which is totally pointless in the end. So, yeah, even if maybe those two wouldn't have had palaces, but they would have at very least have had their shadows loiter about in mementos now and then. Next on, Elias Pseudo asks, who do you think is the cutest, Caroline, Justine, or the cute spoiler? Lavenza. I don't know how you can even answer anything else. Lavenza is like, look at her! She looks adorable, but she has like all the fierce strictness of Margaret. I can only imagine what the dynamic between those sisters must be like whenever they are together. It's kind of impressive. I really hope we get to see more of her in the future, especially like interacting with her siblings. That would just be so amazing. I love this girl, I love her design, I want better artwork of her, I want more lines for her. I just want to see her more often. So, and our last one for tonight, Shoichi Mayoshi asks, is there a symbolic connection between the Velvet Room attendants and the protagonists? I used to believe the attendants were supposed to be opposites to the protagonists, but with the reveal of Lavenza, I'm not so sure anymore. Actually, you are not that far off. I've discussed this on my blog before, but to me it is pretty damn obvious that what the attendants are supposed to represent is the animus archetype as it is used within the Jungian analysis. Like I've mentioned before in my Arcana analysis that animus and anima stand for the quintessential masculinity and femininity that exists within every single person regardless of gender. However, that's not all that Jung saw them as. Jung also saw them as the archetype that determines how we interact with our surroundings and with the people around us, how we define our relationships. He thought that we always define our relationships based on the gender traits that are not present in our personality. It just means that this otherness that this person does not identify with at all would be a very defining factor in how this person sees other people. And I think that's what we see with the Velvet Room attendants ever since Persona 3. They are tailored towards the protagonists to represent the gender traits that are not represented within them themselves. And not just the gender traits, but a lot of traits that are not represented within themselves but are not their shadow, but just things that they don't identify with personally. Elizabeth is feminine, outgoing, cheerful, loud, brash, all the things that you would never associate with the outward personality of the Persona 3 protagonists. Likewise, Theodore is calm, polite, often scared, all these things that you would not associate with the female protagonist. You get the same with Margaret. It goes on and on like that. And I don't think that Lavenza is actually an exception to the rule here, because while her being split up makes it harder to see how she directly mirrors that archetype within the protagonist, the fact that she was split up alone is already a mirror to the protagonist. The protagonist was forced to live a double life due to his being put on rehabilitation, just like how Lavenza was split up against her will. And so the two sides of Lavenza can be likened to counterparts of the two sides of the protagonist himself. Caroline is like strict, rude, she always wants her way and never wants to give anybody the time of the day. She likes to make fun of people and she will never hold back, which is the exact opposite of how the protagonist has to behave in society because he needs to keep a low profile. Likewise, Justine is polite, she holds back a lot, she doesn't actually say what she's thinking about, which is the opposite to how the protagonist acts when he's in action, doing his thing and stealing stuff and taking names like nobody's business. And I think the way in which Lavenza is reunited in the end of the game can also be symbolic for how the protagonist is able to reunite these two sides of his personality when Yaldabaoth's scheme is finally up and he can just drop all the pretenses. The protagonist, how we see him in the end of the game, he's not smirking like a crazy lunatic, but he's still like standing on the back seat of the bus looking out from the above, which you definitely shouldn't do. It's like a balance between the two personalities of his that we see during the game. So in a way he's reconciled those two sides of his because there was no longer a need to keep them apart, much like how Lavenza has remerged into one person. Okay. I talk too much, and it's late, and I should edit this and put it online and then feel accomplished for doing something. But anyway, this was me answering questions for you guys, and what did you think about this video? Did you think this was a nice alternative to what I usually do, or maybe just a nice filler to tide you guys over for whatever else you're waiting for me, which is probably the Arcana analysis, because I know you guys. If you like this video and you want to see more like this, just feel free to ask me whatever questions you have in the comments or on my Tumblr, which I'll try to put somewhere in the end credits screen. As always, if you like this video, feel free to put a like on it so YouTube's algorithms can also know that you liked it. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, and you can see all the different ways to support me here. And that's it for me for now. I'll see you guys later. Bye!